And some people have even said that it's actually Elvis who didn't die at all, and he's actually Bob. But certainly, in my opinion, with the analysis that we're going to be doing, I mean, Bob has said himself that he's not Elvis Presley.
He opens his mouth to sing, and the entire room goes dead silent. The voice is a deep, velvety baritone, hauntingly familiar, and carrying the exact same warmth the world thought it lost forever on a hot August day in 1977. Standing behind a simple wooden pulpit in Arkansas, this country preacher looks, speaks, and sings like a ghost. Could the most famous man on earth, Elvis Presley, have actually pulled off the ultimate escape, trading a golden cage for a quiet church? After 40 years, Pastor Bob is breaking his silence.
The Echo in the Pines, a Sunday in Benton, Arkansas.
The gravel parking lot on Samples Road is packed with license plates from places hundreds of miles away. People have traveled from Ohio, Texas, and even across the Atlantic, all squeezing into the wooden pews of the household of faith. They are not here for a typical Sunday service. They are waiting for a man to walk out from behind the curtain, a man who has spent years carrying the weight of a legendary ghost on his shoulders. When Bob Joyce finally takes his place at the front of the room, a quiet wave of whispering sweeps through the benches. He is wearing a simple suit, his hair neatly styled, looking every bit the part of a traditional Southern preacher. Yet, the way he holds himself immediately commands the space. He moves with a quiet, deliberate grace that feels strangely grand for a humble church in the backwoods of Benton. He smiles, greets his congregation, and sits down at the piano. The moment his fingers touch the keys, the atmosphere in the room shifts. He doesn't just play the music, he lets it wash over him, closing his eyes as he coaxes a rich, rolling melody from the instrument. When he leans into the microphone to speak, his speaking voice is a low, soothing rumble. It has that thick, polite Southern drawl, punctuated by a gentle hum, the kind of voice that immediately makes you feel at home. But it also makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Every eye in the room is locked onto him, searching his face. They are scanning the slope of his nose, the shape of his jawline, and the deep-set intensity of his eyes. Fans of a bygone era sit shoulder to shoulder with local churchgoers, both groups feeling the same strange electricity. To the locals, he is simply Brother Bob, a man who has guided them through grief, celebrated their marriages, and delivered steady sermons for decades. To the outsiders, he is a living miracle, a man who supposedly staged his own exit from a chaotic world of pills and flashing lights to find peace in the quiet hills of Arkansas. As he prepares to sing his first hymn of the morning, the tension inside the building is palpable. You can hear the hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of paper fans, but otherwise, nobody moves. They are waiting for the first note to drop, waiting to hear if the legend is true. When he finally draws in a breath and begins to sing, the sound fills every corner of the wooden structure, heavy with emotion and an unmistakable, haunting depth. It is a moment where reality and belief seem to blur entirely. When Pastor Bob finally chose to speak directly about the Elvis Presley connection, he did so without anger, but with a profound, weary sincerity. He stood before his congregation and his online audience and laid the truth bare. He explained that he was not the king of rock and roll, that he had never set foot in Graceland as its owner, and that he was simply a country preacher trying to do God's work. He addressed the physical comparisons directly, pointing out the simple biological reality that he is far too young to be Elvis, who would now be entering his 90s. But how did a humble country preacher become the epicenter of a mystery that refused to stay buried? The Roots of the Whispers, August 16th, 1977. That was the day the music died. The day the world was told that Elvis Presley had passed away at Graceland at the age of 42. But for millions of devastated fans, the official story never quite sat right. From the very beginning, the grief was accompanied by a lingering, stubborn doubt. Rumors spread like wildfire. The casket was suspiciously heavy. The middle name on the tombstone was misspelled, and eyewitnesses claimed to have seen a black helicopter rising from the estate grounds shortly before the public announcement. For decades, the idea that Elvis had staged his own exit from the blinding light of superstardom remained a quiet subculture. People wanted to believe that the king, crushed by the suffocating weight of fame, the endless demands of handlers, and a reliance on prescription medication, had found a desperate way out. The theory was simple. He didn't want to die. He just wanted to stop being Elvis. He wanted to shed the jumpsuits, the bodyguards, and the golden cage of Memphis, to find a quiet, anonymous life where he could simply exist as a normal man. As the years rolled on, the search for the escaped legend took many strange turns. But the rumors took on a completely new shape when video clips of a small-town preacher in Arkansas started finding their way onto the internet. Here was a man who didn't look like a cheap impersonator trying to cash in on a legacy. He didn't wear sequins, he didn't dye his hair jet black, and he didn't do the signature hip shakes. Instead, Bob Joyce was just preaching the gospel. Yet, the way he sang, with that deeply rooted velvety gospel delivery, struck a chord with people who had spent their entire lives studying Elvis's voice. It was a well-known fact that Elvis's deepest musical love was gospel. Despite all his rock and roll fame, the only Grammy Awards he ever won during his lifetime were for his sacred and gospel recordings. He would spend hours after his massive Las Vegas shows wound down, huddled around a piano with his backing singers, singing old hymns until the sun came up. It was his sanctuary. So, when people saw Pastor Bob standing at a pulpit, ignoring the rock hits and focusing entirely on old-time gospel music, it felt like the perfect, logical conclusion to the Great Escape story. If Elvis had survived, this is exactly where his soul would have led him. The theory began to harden into a conviction for thousands of observers. They argued that Elvis, a deeply religious man who was always searching for a higher purpose beyond his own fame, had finally found his true calling. He had traded the stage of the international arena for the altar of a modest country church, leaving the screaming crowds behind for a quiet flock of believers. The narrative felt incredibly human, a redemption arc for a man who had been consumed by his own myth. He was no longer a commodity owned by record labels and movie studios. He was just a shepherd tending to a small, quiet pasture. But a compelling story still needs physical proof to survive the test of time, and the deeper people looked into the preacher from Benton, the more coincidences they began to unearth. When a voice this familiar suddenly rises from the quiet woods of Arkansas, the world doesn't just listen. It begins to search for proof, the evidence and the parallels. When you place recordings of Pastor Bob Joyce next to vintage tapes of Elvis Presley, the similarities are hard to ignore. It is not just the singing voice, though the rich, vibrato-laden baritone is what usually grabs people first. The connection goes much deeper into the tiny, subconscious details of how both men exist in a room. Observers have spent years dissecting video footage, frame by frame, compiling list after list of physical and vocal parallels that they believe point to a single shared identity. One of the most frequently cited pieces of evidence is the way Pastor Bob speaks. When he is not singing, his conversational voice carries a very specific, soft-spoken cadence. He punctuates his sentences with a slight rhythmic throat clearing and a gentle hum, a habit that Elvis was famous for during his casual, off-camera moments. When he tells a story from the pulpit, his eyes often downcast before sweeping up to lock onto the listener with an intense, blue-eyed gaze. For lifelong fans, this is the exact same charismatic, disarming gaze that defined the King's interactions with reporters and audiences alike. Then there are the physical traits. Skeptics and believers alike have pointed to the shape of his nose, the distinct structure of his jawline, and the way his lips move when he pronounces certain words. Even the natural gap between his front teeth and the way he smirks when amused seem to match the older Elvis. When he sits at the piano, his hands cover the keys with the same relaxed, self-taught posture. He doesn't look at his hands while playing. He looks out, letting his fingers find the chords by memory and feel, a trait highly characteristic of Elvis's intuitive, ear-trained piano-playing style. Beyond the physical, theorists look at the timeline. It is suggested that if Elvis did indeed slip away on that hot August afternoon in 1977, he would have needed time to heal, reconstruct his life, and find a safe haven. The quiet hills of Arkansas would offer the perfect geography. Far enough from the media centers of New York and Los Angeles, yet close enough to his southern roots to feel like home. Benton provided a sanctuary where a man could age naturally without the constant pressure of a global spotlight. But perhaps the most compelling parallel is the emotional weight behind the music. When Pastor Bob sings old hymns like Amazing Grace or How Great Thou Art, there is a deep, almost painful sincerity in his delivery. It doesn't feel like an act, and it certainly doesn't feel like someone trying to imitate a pop star. It feels like a man who has lived through immense struggle, who knows what it is like to lose everything, and who has found peace in a quiet room. For those who believe, this emotional resonance is the ultimate signature. They see a tired, older icon who finally got to put down the heavy crown of rock and roll and pick up the humble shepherd's crook. To the internet, he is a puzzle to be solved, a walking collection of vocal frequencies, facial structures, and physical mannerisms that seem to defy probability. People spend hours in comment sections debating the exact angle of his chin or the pitch of his laugh, convinced that they are staring at the ultimate cover-up. Yet, behind the grand theories and the endless comparisons lies a man who actually has to live this life every single Sunday. Who is Bob beyond their church pulpit? The shepherd and his barn. Strip away the flashing cameras, the online forums, and the whispers of a faked death, and you find a man with a real, deeply documented history. Long before the internet decided he was a resurrected music icon, Bob Joyce was simply a man devoted to his faith. He wasn't born in a Tupelo shotgun house. He grew up in a completely different era, carving out a quiet life of ministry in the American South. He has been married to his wife, Willina, since 1975, and together they have raised a family, walked through the hardships of life, and quietly built a small community of believers. For decades, his work went largely unnoticed by the world at large. He preached in small rental properties, local community centers, and humble church buildings, never seeking the bright lights or the stadium crowds. He was the kind of pastor who visited the sick in the hospital, helped families buy groceries when times were tough, and delivered sermons focused on simple grace. But as his online presence grew, his congregation had to adapt to a massive influx of newcomers. To handle the growing crowds of travelers and curious onlookers, the Household of Faith Church eventually moved into a larger, rustic structure on Samples Road in Benton, known affectionately as The Barn. Inside the barn, you won't find the theatricality of a modern megachurch. There are no smoke machines, no high-tech light shows, and no polished, multi-million-dollar production crews. The walls are made of warm wood. The stage is simple, and the focus remains entirely on old-school, traditional worship. Pastor Bob takes the pulpit with a worn Bible in hand, delivering messages that are grounded, practical, and deeply emotional. He speaks about redemption, the power of letting go of the past, and the peace that comes from serving a higher purpose. His congregation is a tight-knit family that has had to learn how to share their shepherd with the rest of the world. On any given Sunday, a regular member who has known Bob for 30 years might sit next to a stranger who has traveled thousands of miles just to watch the pastor's facial expressions. The local flock is fiercely protective of their preacher. They know the toll the rumors take on him, and they watch over him with a quiet, watchful eye, making sure the sanctuary remains a place of worship rather than a tourist attraction. Yet, they also welcome the newcomers with open arms, hoping that those who come looking for a ghost might end up finding something much more meaningful. Pastor Bob himself navigates this strange dual existence with immense patience. He doesn't charge admission, he doesn't sell merchandise, and he doesn't try to exploit the massive wave of attention for personal wealth. Instead, he simply continues to do what he has always done: preach, play the piano, and sing. He has lived a life of quiet service, but the sheer volume of the global noise outside his church doors eventually reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. The shadow of Memphis was growing longer, and the time came when the preacher in the pines had to address the elephant in the room. What happens when your sanctuary of worship is transformed into a stage for global curiosity? The weight of the crown. As the crowd inside the barn continues to swell with each passing year, the pressure on Bob Joyce has shifted from a quiet local curiosity into a global phenomenon. For a long time, he tried to simply ignore the whispers, focusing entirely on his sermons and his music. But when people started showing up at his home, camping out in the church parking lot, and filming his every move with high-powered cameras, he realized that silence was no longer an option. The moment had come to look the world in the eye and address the ghost that had been following him for decades. When Pastor Bob finally chose to speak directly about the Elvis Presley connection, he did so without anger, but with a profound, weary sincerity. He stood before his congregation and his online audience and laid the truth bare. He explained that he was not the king of rock and roll, that he had never set foot in Graceland as its owner, and that he was simply a country preacher trying to do God's work. He addressed the physical comparisons directly, pointing out the simple biological reality that he is far too young to be Elvis, who would now be entering his 90s. Despite his clear and repeated denials, the believers have not gone away. For many, his rejection of the identity is actually seen as the ultimate proof of the story. They argue that if Elvis did indeed pull off the perfect escape to find peace, he would naturally deny his past to protect his new life and the family he has built in Arkansas. Critics of the theory, on the other hand, worry about the toll this constant scrutiny takes on a man who just wants to live a quiet life. They point out the unfairness of forcing a humble pastor to carry the hopes, grief, and unfulfilled dreams of a generation that refuses to let their idol go. Yet, there is a strange, beautiful irony in how this story has unfolded. Even though Pastor Bob denies being Elvis, he has not stopped singing the gospel songs that both men love so dearly. He continues to sit at his piano, closing his eyes and pouring his soul into the music. In doing so, he has created a unique space where the memory of a legend and the ministry of a preacher exist in perfect, peaceful harmony. Those who travel to Benton looking for a fallen star often leave with a different kind of peace, touched by the warmth of a small-town church that welcomed them without judgment. In the end, perhaps the truth of Bob Joyce isn't about solving a mystery or analyzing vocal frequencies. It is about the power of a voice to heal, to bring people together, and to offer a sense of comfort in a chaotic world. Whether he is a ghost from Memphis or simply a devoted shepherd from Arkansas, the music echoing from the barn on Samples Road remains a powerful reminder that some voices are simply too beautiful to ever truly be silenced. The king may have left the building, but in the quiet pine hills of Benton, the song goes on. In the quiet pine hills of Benton, the song goes on, proving that some voices are simply too beautiful to ever truly be silenced. Whether you see a ghost or a shepherd, the mystery remains. If you want to uncover more fascinating, untold stories just like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching and supporting us.